Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. And I rise on behalf of the California Legislative Black Caucus in support of SCR 135 that observes Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. As we recognize Yom HaShoah and the millions of lives, particularly our Jewish loved ones who were brutally murdered in the Holocaust, we must never forget the profound lessons learned from this evil act of genocide and stand united against all forms of hatred and bigotry. As a Black woman whose ancestors were enslaved in this country, I'm deeply aware of the parallels between the Holocaust and historic struggles of Black Americans and our two communities that have stood together for generations for justice in this country, a relationship that will and must continue in this 21st century and into the future. Just as the Jewish people experienced horrific violence and persecution in Nazi Germany, Black people have endured the horrors of slavery, racial terror, oppression, and systemic racism in America. In fact, it was the American practices of racism, oppression, and racialized terror that became a model for the Nazi Party. The party traveled to the American South to better learn how to run a nation with a legalized system of oppression with the goal of genocide. In the late 19th century and 20th century, America led the world in race-based lawmaking, essentially legalizing white supremacy, nationalism, and the dehumanization of Black people, showing to the world how hate can be exported. U.S. Congress passed immigration laws that guaranteed the entrance of immigrants predominantly from Northern European countries while largely banning what Americans at the time deemed undesirables, like Jews and Asians and immigrants of ethnic descent. Thanks to the Black freedom struggle led in deep partnership with the Jewish community, these anti-immigration laws were eventually reversed as part of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. 64 Civil Rights Act. Meanwhile, Jim Crow segregation that had dominated much of the South, the North, and now we know California, had established laws that denied Black Americans their rights and created a system of division that our communities continue today. These lessons learned of the Holocaust help us understand that if we don't learn from our history, we are bound to repeat it. And we have to know, as my good colleague from Orange County said, that we are in a moment of an authoritarian rule that is perpetuating hate and puts so many of our families in danger. We only need to look that after Hitler took power in 1933, that the Nazis used race-based pseudoscience and eugenics to justify their persecution of the Jews. The Nuremberg laws that deprived Jews of their human rights were taken from the one-drop rule used against Black people in America. Historic accounts like these remind us that we must always fight against bigotry. We must always stand against oppression. We must always denounce violence to ensure that atrocities never happen again. And decades later in the 20th century, Black and Jewish communities in the US continue to work together in fighting against terrorizing hate, recognizing that that is the sole foundation for hope. The hope for a society of belonging, a hope for a society that is truly free, and for a justice that covers all of us, no matter your religion, no matter your race or creed. Today in the 21st century, we have to lean in to the lessons of the past. We have to have the moral courage to transform our pain into peace and to turn bombs into tools of humanitarian that build our communities of brother and sisterhood. And that's why any acts of bloodshed and genocide, many of like the ones that we're experiencing around the world, must not be ignored. The terrible tragedy and pain of October 7th should never be forgotten. And may the memory of the loved ones who are with us today from the Holocaust inspire us to strive for a world where peace prevails for the sake of all of our generations to come. As we recognize Holocaust Remembrance Day, let it serve as a beacon to guide us toward a future of greater compassion, inclusion, tolerance, and most of all, love. Thank you, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Smallwood-Cuevas.